Good morning, Sandy Levesque here. Welcome to Think and Grow Rich Daily Hangout. Hope you're well. This is a hangout which is dedicated to one thing, the book Think and Grow Rich, which was the starting book for all personal development, really, and the culmination of over 500 interviews with the most successful entrepreneurs on the planet at the time. So this is an online book group. There's actually normally a few of us on, but as it's the beginning of August, a lot of people are away and on holiday, so it's just me womening the forts. So I hope you're well. If you're watching and you'd like to come onto the Hangout, then you're welcome to. I'm just going to put the Q&A button, so you can also leave us any questions or comments. And I'm just realizing it looks like I haven't brushed my hair for about a week, which is usually how my hair looks, actually. I've just been out for a walk and it's really windy here, so I'm living now in Portugal, by the seaside, and it's very windy actually. I went to a beach yesterday and nearly blew into the sea, so it was quite funny. So that's not why you're here to watch this. You're here to watch this to get a daily dose of prosperity consciousness. So you've come to the right place. I'm just going to share my screen so that we can read. And basically, what we were reading about yesterday was how to have faith that things can work and that you can make things work, and how to build up your self-confidence. Now, not in the sense of self-confidence like, yeah, I'm so confident I can talk to you right now. Self-confidence in the sense that when you put your mind to something, you know you can make it happen, and that's actually a quality that a lot of people don't really have, or they might have in some areas, but then not in other ones. I always felt like that. With money, I always felt like money was my Achilles heel, where I just couldn't seem to do what I actually wanted after a long time of hating money, and that's slowly been shifting over the last 18 months. I've been invited onto a hangout to talk about that today, called Healing Your Relationship with Money. So if you want more information about that, send me a message on Facebook or look at my Facebook wall, because I'll be posting about that later today. But it's building that self-confidence that you can do what you would like to do, and applying that with the technique of auto-suggestion, which is talked about earlier on in this book. And that's basically, it sounds fancy, but auto-suggestion is very simply repeatedly saying something out loud until your subconscious mind has no choice but to take it in. It's almost like brainwashing yourself. And Napoleon actually gives you specific tools that you can use to do that. And I'm actually doing this every day, memorizing and reading out loud the self-confidence formula, my purpose, my definite chief aim, and a target, like my financial target. So every night I read those out loud to myself, and most mornings as well. So that's part of influencing our subconscious mind so that it starts to shift. Because often what happens otherwise is that our logical mind is saying it wants this, but our subconscious mind, which is like the iceberg underneath the water, is actually going in a different direction, for whatever reason. If you've always struggled, if you've always just got by, if you've been in debt, or you always had anxiety with money, that's what's going on really under the surface. And so auto-suggestion, I just think it's an amazing tool because it helps you to start to shift that iceberg, to shift the direction of it. And it doesn't happen overnight, to be honest. When I started to do it, it felt like nothing was happening. My iceberg was bloody massive. But once you start actually regularly applying this tool, you start to build up this faith. It's almost like the fact that you've written it on paper, and I spoke about this yesterday, I won't repeat myself, but you build up this faith that because you've got it on paper, because you're speaking it into the world literally, that it's going to do something, especially if you're consistent with it and do it every day, which is what Napoleon is saying in this book. So let's go ahead and actually read from the book. So basically, I just want to give you context for where we are, because we're midway through chapter 2, or chapter 3 actually, sorry, which is all about faith. We read chapter 2 is about burning desire. So that was the backdrop, which was talking about how to have that self-confidence in yourself. So, okay, so basically, because of the need Okay, so then Napoleon was talking about how leaders who understood this and or understand this and apply this can achieve great things. And he gives the example of Mahatma Gandhi, how Gandhi got 200 million people in India to have faith in his vision and his way of achieving that vision. Because he didn't have guns or tanks or armies to drive out the British from India when they were still under British rule and didn't want to be anymore. He only had this faith that peaceful protest would drive them out, and he was right. And so because of the need for faith and cooperation in operating business and industry, it will be both interesting and profitable to analyze an event which provides. Oh, okay, I'm just going to go back a paragraph, sorry. The watchword of the future will be human happiness and contentment, and when this state of mind shall have been attained, the production will take care of itself more effectively than anything that has ever been accomplished where men did not and could not mix faith and individual interest with their labor. Because of the need for faith and cooperation on operating business and industry, it will be both interesting and profitable to analyze an event which provides an excellent understanding of the method by which industrialists and businessmen accumulate great fortunes by giving before they try to get. The event chosen for this illustration dates back to 1900, when the United States Steel Corporation was being formed. As you read the story, bear in mind these fundamental facts, and you will understand how ideas have been converted into huge fortunes. First, the huge United States Steel Corporation was born in the mind of Charles M. Schwab in the form of an idea he created through his imagination. Second, he mixed faith with his idea. Third, he formulated a plan for the transformation of his idea into physical and financial reality. Fourth, he put his plan into action with his famous speech at the University Club. You're going to get all the details in a second, by the way. Fifth, he applied and followed through on his plan with persistence and backed it with firm decision until it had been fully carried out. Sixth, he prepared the way for success by a burning desire for success. If you are one of those who have often wondered how great fortunes are accumulated, this story of the creation of the United States Steel Corporation will be enlightening. If you have any doubt that people can think and grow rich, this story should dispel that doubt, because you can plainly see in the story of the United States Steel Company the application of a major portion of the 13 principles described in this book. This astounding description of the power of an idea was dramatically told by John Lowell in the New York World Telegram, with whose courtesy it is here reprinted. A pretty after-dinner speech for $1 billion. When, on the evening of December 12, 1900, some 80 of the nation's financial nobility gathered in the banquet hall of the University Club on Fifth Avenue to do honor to a young man from out of the West, not half a dozen of the guests realized they were to witness the most significant episode in American industrial history. J. Edward Simmons and Charles Stuart Smith, their hearts full of gratitude for the lavish hospitality bestowed on them by Charles M. Schwab during a recent visit to Pittsburgh, had arranged the dinner to introduce the 38-year-old steelman to Eastern Banking Society. But they did not expect him to stampede the convention. They warned him, in fact, that the bosoms within New York stuffed shirts would not be responsive to oratory, and that if he didn't want to bore the Steelhans and Harrimans and Vanderbilts, he had better limit himself to 15 or 20 minutes of polite vaporings and let it go at that. Even Pierpont Morgan, John Pierpont Morgan, of J.P. Morgan today, the big bank, sitting on the right hand of Schwab, as became his imperial dignity, intended to grace the banquet table with his presence only briefly, and so far as the press and public were concerned, the whole affair was of so little moment that no mention of it found its way into print the next day. So the two hosts and the distinguished guests ate their way through the usual 7 or 8 courses. There was little conversation, and what there was of it was restrained. Few of the bankers and brokers had met Schwab, whose career had floundered along the banks of the Monongahela, and none knew him well. But before the evening was over, they, and with them Money Master Morgan, were to be swept off their feet, and $1 billion baby, the United States Steel Corporation, was to be conceived. It is perhaps unfortunate, for the sake of history, that no record of Charlie Schwab's speech at the dinner ever was made. He repeated some parts of it at a later date during a similar meeting of Chicago bankers. And still later, when the government brought suit to dissolve the Steel Trust, he gave his own version, from the witness stand, of the remarks that stimulated Morgan into a frenzy of financial activity. It is probable, however, that it was a homely speech, somewhat ungrammatical, for the niceties of language never bothered Schwab, full of epigram and threaded with wit. But aside from that, it had a galvanic force and effect upon the 5 billions of estimated capital that was represented by the diners. After it was over, and the gathering was still under its spell, although Schwab had talked for 90 minutes, Morgan led the orator to a recessed window where, dangling their legs from the high uncomfortable seats, they talked for an hour more. The magic of the Schwab personality had been turned on, full force, but what was more important and lasting was the full-fledged, clear-cut program he laid down for the aggrandizement of steel. Many other men had tried to interest Morgan in slapping together a steel trust, after the pattern of the biscuit, wire, and hoop, sugar, rubber, whiskey, oil, or chewing gum combinations. John W. Gates, the gambler, had urged it, but Morgan distrusted him. The Moore boys, Bill and Jim, Chicago stock jobbers, who had glued together a match trust and a cracker corporation, had urged it and failed. Elbert H. Gary, the sanctimonious county lawyer, wanted to foster it, but he wasn't big enough to be impressive. Until Schwab's eloquence took J.P. Morgan to the heights from which he could visualize the solid results of the most daring financial undertaking ever conceived, the project was regarded as a delirious dream of easy money crackpots. The financial magnetism that began a generation ago to attract thousands of small and sometimes inefficiently managed companies into large and competition-crushing combinations had become operative in the steel world through the devices of that jovial business pirate, John W. Gates. Gates had already formed the American Steel and Wire Company out of a chain of small concerns, and together with Morgan had created the Federal Steel Company. The National Tube and American Bridge Companies were two more Morgan concerns, and the Moore brothers had forsaken the match and cookie business to form the American Group, Tin Plate, Steel Hoop, Sheet Steel, and the National Steel Company. But by the side of Andrew Carnegie's gigantic vertical trust, a trust owned and operated by 53 partners, those other combinations were precarious. Small, I guess. They might combine to their heart's content, but the whole lot of them couldn't make a dent in the Carnegie organization, and Morgan knew it. The eccentric old Scot knew it too. From the magnificent heights of Skybow Castle, he had viewed, first with amusement and then with resentment, the attempts of Morgan's smaller companies to cut into his business. When the attempts became too bold, Carnegie's temper was translated into anger and retaliation. He decided to duplicate every mill owned by his rivals. Hitherto, he hadn't been interested in wire, pipe, hoops, or sheet. Instead, he was content to sell such companies the raw steel and let them work it into whatever shape they wanted. Now, with Schwab as his chief and able lieutenant, he planned to drive his enemies to the wall. So it was in that speech of Charles M. Schwab Morgan saw the answer to his problem of combination. A trust without Carnegie, giant of them all, would be no trust at all, a plum pudding, as one writer said, without the plums. Schwab's speech on the night of December 12, 1900, undoubtedly carried the inference, though not the pledge, that the vast Carnegie enterprise could be brought under the Morgan tent. He talked of the world future for steel, of reorganization for efficiency, of specialization, of the scrapping of unsuccessful mills, and concentration of effort on the flourishing properties, of economies in the ore traffic, of economies in overhead and administrative departments, of capturing foreign markets. More than that, he told the buccaneers among them wherein lay the errors of their customary piracy. Their purposes, he inferred, had been to create monopolies, raise prices, and pay themselves fat dividends out of privilege. Schwab condemned the system in his heartiest manner. The short-sightedness of such a policy, he told his hearers, lay in the fact that it restricted the market in an era when everything cried for expansion. By cheapening the cost of steel, he argued, an ever-expanding market would be created, more uses for steel would be devised, and a goodly portion of the world trade could be captured. Actually, though he did not know it, Schwab was an apostle of modern mass production. So the dinner at the University Club came to an end. Morgan went home to think about Schwab's rosy predictions. Schwab went back to Pittsburgh to run the steel business for Andre Carnegie, while Gary and the rest went back to their stock tickers to fiddle around in anticipation of the next move. It was not long coming. It took Morgan about 1 week to digest the feast of reason Schwab had placed before him. When he reassured himself that no financial indigestion was to result, he sent for Schwab and found the young man rather coy. Mr. Carnegie, Schwab indicated, might not like it if he found his trusted company president had been flirting with the Emperor of Wall Street, the street upon which Carnegie was resolved never to tread. Then it was suggested by John W. Gates, the go-between, that if Schwab happened to be in the Bellevue Hotel in Philadelphia, J.P. Morgan might also happen to be there. When Schwab arrived, however, Morgan was inconveniently ill at his New York home, and so, on the elder man's pressing invitation, Schwab went to New York and presented himself at the door of the financier's library. Now, certain economic historians have professed the belief that from the beginning to the end of the drama, the stage was set by Andrew Carnegie, that the dinner to Schwab, the famous speech, the Sunday night conference between Schwab and the Money King, were events arranged by the canny Scott. The truth is exactly the opposite. When Schwab was called in to consummate the deal, he didn't even know whether the little boss, as Andrew was called, would so much as listen to an offer to sell, particularly to a group of men whom Andrew regarded as being endowed with something less than holiness. Andrew Carnegie, by the way, he was a bit like Richard Branson 100 or so years ago. He owned the biggest steel company in the US, and he started from scratch. He's actually one of the reasons why this book was even created, just to give you that background. But Schwab did take it into the conference with him in his own handwriting, 6 sheets of copperplate figures representing, to his mind, the physical worth and the potential earning capacity of every steel company he regarded as an essential star in the new metal firmament. 4 men pondered over these figures all night. The chief, of course, was Morgan, steadfast in his belief in the divine right of money. With him was his aristocratic partner, Robert Bacon, a scholar and a gentleman. The third was John W. Gates, whom Morgan scorned as a gambler and used as a tool. The fourth was Schwab, who knew more about the processes of making and selling steel than any whole group of men then living. Throughout that conference, the Pittsburghers' figures were never questioned. If he said a company was worth so much, then it was worth that much and no more. He was insistent, too, upon including in the combination only those concerns he nominated. He had conceived a corporation in which there would be no duplication, not even to satisfy the greed of friends who wanted to unload their companies upon the broad Morgan shoulders. Thus, he left out by design a number of the larger concerns upon which the walruses and carpenters of Wall Street had cast hungry eyes. When dawn came, Morgan rose and straightened his back. Only one question remained. "Do you think you can persuade Andrew Carnegie to sell?" he asked. "I can try," said Schwab. "If you can get him to sell, I will undertake the matter," said Morgan. So far, so good. But would Carnegie sell? How much would he demand? Schwab thought about $320 million. What would he take payment in? Common or preferred stocks? Bonds? Cash? Nobody could raise $250 million in cash. There was a golf game in January on the frost-cracking heath of the St. Andrew's Links in Westchester, with Andrew bundled up in sweaters against the cold, and Charlie talking volubly as usual to keep his spirits up. But no word of business was mentioned until the pair sat down in the cozy warmth of the Carnegie cottage hard by. Then, with the same persuasiveness that had hypnotized 80 millionaires at the University Club, Schwab poured out the glittering promises of retirement and comfort, of untold millions to satisfy the old man's social caprices. Andrew Carnegie was a big philanthropist. Carnegie capitulated, wrote a figure on a slip of paper, handed it to Schwab, and said, "All right, that's what we'll sell for." The figure was approximately $400 million and was reached by taking the $320 million mentioned by Schwab as a basic figure and adding to it $80 million to represent the increased capital value over the previous 2 years. Later, on the deck of a transatlantic liner, the Scotsman said ruefully to Morgan, "I wish I had asked you for $100 million more." "If you had asked for it, you would have got it," Morgan told him cheerfully. "Oh, There was an uproar, of course. A British correspondent cabled that the foreign steelworld was appalled by the gigantic combination. President Hadley of Yale declared that unless trusts were regulated, the country might expect an emperor in Washington within the next 25 years. But that able stock manipulator, Keene, went at his work of shoving the new stock at the public so vigorously that all the excess water, estimated by some at nearly $600 million, was absorbed in a twinkling. So Carnegie had his millions, and the Morgan Syndicate had 62 million for all its trouble, and all the boys from Gates to Gary had their millions. The 38-year-old Schwab had his reward. He was made president of the new corporation and remained in control until 1930. The dramatic story of big business, which you have just finished, was included in this book because it is a perfect illustration of the method by which desire can be transmuted into its physical equivalent. I imagine some readers will question the statement that a mere intangible desire can be converted into its physical equivalent. Doubtless some will say, you cannot convert nothing into something. The answer is in the story of the United States Steel. That giant organization was created in the mind of one man. The plan by which the organization was provided with the steel mills that gave it financial stability was created in the mind of the same man. His faith, his desire, his imagination, his persistence were the real ingredients that went into United States Steel. The steel mills and mechanical equipment acquired by the corporation after it had been brought into legal existence were incidental, but careful analysis will disclose the fact that the appraised value of the properties acquired by the corporation increased in value by an estimated $600 million by the mere transaction which consolidated them under one management. In other words, Charles M. Schwab's idea, plus the faith with which he conveyed it to the minds of J.P. Morgan and the others, was marketed for a profit of approximately $600 million. Not an insignificant sum for a single idea. And remember, this was in 1900, so this would probably be about $6 billion today, I've read. What happened to some of the men who took their share of the millions of dollars of profit made by this transaction is a matter of which we are not now concerned. The important feature of the astounding achievement is that it serves as unquestionable evidence of the soundness of the philosophy described in this book, because this philosophy was the warp and the woof of the entire transaction. Moreover, the practicability of the philosophy has been established by the fact that the United States Steel Corporation prospered and became one of the richest and most powerful corporations in America, employing thousands of people, developing new uses for steel, and opening new markets, thus proving that the $600 million in profit which the Schwab idea produced was earned. Riches begin in the form of thought. The amount is limited only by the person in whose mind the thought is put into motion. Faith removes limitations. Remember this when you are ready to bargain with life for whatever it is that you ask as your price for having passed this way. Remember also that the man who created the United States Steel Corporation was practically unknown at the time. He was merely Andrew Carnegie's Man Friday until he gave birth to the famous idea, his famous idea. After that, he quickly rose to a position of power, fame, and riches. There are no limitations to the mind except those we acknowledge. Both poverty and riches are the offspring of thought. Okay, I'll stop reading there, and that's the end of chapter 3. From Miss Mansu. Bonjour, hi. Hola. I'm in Portugal, so I'll say hola now, although I'm half French. So I hope that you got something out of that story. It's pretty amazing, really, if you think about it. You know, if you put yourself in that situation, imagine sitting in a room. There's 80 millionaires, you know, the most successful businessmen in America at that time, and you're not known to any of them because you work for one of those millionaires, a multimillionaire, and you have this idea though, and this vision of what's possible with the work that you do, you know, in your industry. And so imagine getting up and speaking to all those people and taking up an hour and a half to do it. You know, he didn't just take 15 or 20 minutes like he was politely told to. He spoke for 90 minutes. You know, that's a long time. So this is clearly something that he had put a lot of thought into. and had been very inspired about. And he had the guts to actually speak it into the world, speak it into existence. And that's something that all of us can do. You know, there's something really powerful about public proclamations and publicly saying that something is possible, that you're going to do it. You know, I have two colleagues actually who are living in Costa Rica. They moved there from Utah, and they were living in Utah for a long time. They're from America, and what they did was they decided they wanted to start traveling more, and they didn't quite know how they were going to do it, but they started to just think, well, we can't just keep waiting. You know, there's never going to be a perfect moment for us to move our entire life and family. They have 3 children. And so they just decided one day, we're going to publicly declare that this is what we're doing. And they told everyone that they knew and declared it on Facebook that they were moving to Costa Rica and they were going to sell all their stuff and move. And so once they'd done that, then it took on a life force of its own. And this is a slightly different example, but it strikes me as another example of, another illustration of the principles we're reading about. Because, you know, when you put something out into the public, it becomes like an entity of its own. You know, like with Schwab, when he spoke at that meeting, that university club dinner, the idea, which had obviously been brewing in his head for months, it became this idea now that was out in the ether that other people could contribute to, and which could start to grow and take on a life force. And that's what happened with these friends of mine. You know, once they publicly declared they were moving, even though they didn't know how they were going to afford it, how they were going to logistically make it all happen, because the husband was working as a realtor, very long hours, big, busy schedule. He had been building an online business at the same time, but it wasn't yet at the level where they could rely on it, you know, for a family of 5. So they decided, oh, and we have a comment. Emma Pen Julius. Yeah, you need to join the Facebook group to get the invitation to actually come into the Hangout. So, of course, you can talk. You're very welcome to. Just join the Facebook group if you're not already in there. If you're already in the Facebook group, then click on the first link I posted just before we started. Okay, and then you can come on. You can also read. You know, I don't normally read as much, but as I said before, summertime, so a lot of people are away. So I'm doing the hosting and the reading, but I'd love to have other people on. So I was just saying that these friends, they didn't know how they were going to move, but they put it out into the world in August 2013, and they began selling their stuff and saving up money, working on their business, and telling more and more people. And then by, I think it was December, you know, like 4 or 5 months later, they were ready to actually move. And so they set themselves a date by which they would start a road trip to get across America and then fly down to Costa Rica. And that's exactly what they did. And they've been living in Costa Rica now since January. So I just love their story, because they had this burning desire to travel, to go to other countries, and they didn't know exactly how it was going to happen, but they had the faith that they could do it, especially if they both, you know, worked on it, worked with the universe and with God, and they made it happen, you know, because they put it out there, and the idea just, it took on this force of its own, and it just contributed to so many things in their lives. Like their business started to grow, their online presence started to grow because they were doing this adventure. Their children started to get excited. Their family were helping them. You know, all these different pieces that you can't really predict before you start something were set in motion, just as they were with the Steel Corporation. You know, Schwab didn't know exactly how it was all going to come together, but he knew by speaking about his idea at a meeting of the richest men in America at that time that something had to happen, and it did. So what you can take away from that story is what is your burning desire? You know, in chapter 2, we looked at that. You know, what is it that you would like more than anything else with your work or whatever you do? You know, or if you work for someone else, you know, what is it in your life that you would really like to do? And are you doing anything to build up the faith that you can make it happen? And if the answer is no, you might want to look at that. In fact, I would highly recommend it. And I've been there myself, when I've realized, okay, I've listened to this book, but I'm not doing the exercises, And I'll never forget, and I speak about this often because I just want a lot of people to hear this story. The guy that inspired me to start these hangouts, he does a telecall on Think and Grow Rich early in the morning for Americans, and I decided to do this more for European times. Anyway, he started reading this book when he was living in a trailer van, earning about $300 a month for a family of 4, I think, at the time, and he just got a huge medical bill for $51,000, and he was just so lost and desperate and just did not know what to do, and prayed, and the sense that he got from praying was that he had to read this book and become a student of it. So becoming a student means actually doing the work. It's not just reading it. So the work with this book is having your written statement of the income you'd like to create, the personal your definite chief aim, and your self-confidence formula. So it sounds like a lot, but actually they're all quite short. I read them every day, and it takes me less than 5 minutes. So you have to ask yourself, is 5 minutes of my day, every day, worth changing my life? Because this guy that I'm talking to you about, he's now on his way to becoming a millionaire. He travels, has had another child, has bought his own house, has totally turned around his life. And that would not be possible if he hadn't become a student of this very same book that you're now reading and listening to. So tune into these hangouts and do the exercises, because you will start to see a difference. I've noticed in myself a difference just from the fact that I'm hosting them, and I've started doing the exercises, because you can't really host this and talk about it without actually doing the stuff yourself. So I have to admit that I wasn't being as consistent with the exercises as I should have been. And it was talking to this guy recently. He actually asked us in a huge event with 2,000 people, who here has read this Think and Grow Rich, and who here is actually applying is reading out loud your personal statement and the self-confidence formula every day. And nearly nobody put up their hands, 2 people in the room, and I was not one of them. So I decided at that moment that I had to fix that. And since then, every time I feel like not doing it, I remember him. So just remember this story and let it inspire you to know that you could, wherever you are now, things could be totally different. And I think it took him, the biggest change for him came within a year. He said that he went from struggling in his business to being in the emails they were sending around of the successes and people doing well. His name was in those emails. So just imagine yourself, whatever you do, maybe you don't do something on the internet, maybe you do something completely different. What would be a kind of a symbol of some kind of success or breakthrough, moving to the next level in what you do? And start thinking about that. Think about it every day. Start imagining what your name would look like on that email or a leaderboard, or paying in that amount to your bank or something. I don't know, whatever it is that you wish to do. I guarantee we'll start to do something. You can think and grow rich. So on that note, I'll leave it at this. If you have any questions or comments, then join our Facebook group, and you'll receive also the links to actually come onto these Hangouts. So you're very welcome to do that. This has been Sandy Levesque. I hope you have an amazing day. Go out and think and grow rich, because I know that you can do it. I'll see you tomorrow.